Once upon a time, there were no superhero movies. Okay, that's not entirely accurate. Rumors of the genre's death have always been greatly exaggerated, obviously, but regardless, I still feel like it's easy to forget that the era when source-reverent comic book adaptations weren't the preeminent source of Hollywood income and fandom obsession was still only the recent past. Yes, we got one movie every couple of years based on bigger-than-comics pop icons like Batman or Superman. Here and there, lesser-known properties got one-and-done tryouts as well. Or you had films like Blade or the first X-Men that figured out how to strip out huge swatches of the material until they ceased to be their comic book selves in favor of matching a more general late 90s action aesthetic.
You actually go outside in these things?
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
The blockbuster landscape as we know it today, dominated as it is by translations striving to bring as much of their story's original heart and soul to the screen, but what about the movies worldwide entertainment landscape?
Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
But in 2015, does anyone want to argue that the movie itself isn't simply a solid 3-star entry buoyed by one really great lead performance that even makes up for an utterly unmemorable second half? I didn't think so. So what of Spider-Man? Do Raimi's original classic and its equally venerated sequel still feel as vital and exceptional as they did a decade ago, or are they continually overpraised, especially since, in their absence, the franchise's most recent cinematic outing, at least for another few months, wound up being two of the all-time worst would-be blockbusters of the young century so far? Or did we have it right from the beginning, when the world fell in love with these movies the first time? Are Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 really that good?
I want Spider-Man!
So I right up there.
I just want to say I really like what you do. I think it's great.
Thanks.
So why not do the whole trilogy, though? Because Spider-Man 3 good a place as any to start. Really That Good is, by design, often a series about recognizing whether or not a film that was widely judged to be good in its own time and or subsequently held to be good since actually holds up to its own reputation in the here and now. However, movies, like all works of art, do not exist in a vacuum. They are products of the people who make them and the times they were made in to one degree or another. Whether the Spider-Man movies hold up now or not, one must begin with the inescapable fact that neither film would be well remembered enough to be worth reconsidering today if it hadn't made a specific and powerful impact in their own time. In other words, it's necessary to understand the world into which Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was born, beginning with the fact that, at the time, the very phrase Sam Raimi's Spider-Man described something that sounded as utterly inconceivable as the phrase Mike Huckabee's presidency or David Spade's Academy Award nomination.
I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
At the turn of the century, the Hollywood landscape of today, where one-time nerds-only properties like comics and video games are money-making blockbusters and cult icon creatives get handed the keys to billion-dollar studio tentpoles, was unthinkable, but also changing right under everyone's noses. One-time outlaw geek sites like AICN were gradually morphing into legit news sources. Studios were seeing the internet as a viable tool for engaging with the audience, and a new generation of filmmakers and deal makers that had grown up marinating in the nascent fan cultures of the 70s and 80s were rising to prominence. The stage was set for a major cultural realignment, a realignment I remember vividly because I was there.
Who am I? You sure you want to know? The story of my life is not for the faint of heart.
If you'll indulge me for just a bit, in this moment in time, I was living a quintessential middle-class American movie geek experience, working in a blockbuster video, ask your parents, with like-minded best friends while studying film and multimedia in a local college. My peers and I had been anxiously following this production, as well as anyone could back in those days, ever since the prospect of a Spider-Man movie had finally become real. Spider-Man, of course, being the superhero who more than any other appealed directly to the sensibilities of luckless comic book-obsessed fanboys like me and my crew. Back then, comic book movies were a total goddamn crapshoot for fans. No matter how popular or long-lived the character in question, you still had no guarantee whether you were going to get the pretty good The Crow or Steel. So there was no way to know how Spider-Man was going to fare. Would they ruin the origin, screw up the villains, ignore Peter Parker's classical nerd character type and cast some obnoxious, then trendy pretty boy like the then much rumored Freddie Prinze Jr.? Ask your parents who Freddie Prinze Jr. was as well. Would he get to keep his proper costume, or would they chicken out and throw him in shitty Matrix gear like they did to the X-Men? And who would direct? James Cameron had tried to make a Spider-Man movie once, but he'd moved on to other stuff. The two names everyone kept hearing were David Fincher and Chris Columbus, neither one of them seemingly ideal for this franchise, though for completely different reasons. And then, out of freaking nowhere, came the news. Spider-Man would be directed by Sam goddamn Raimi. Again, this didn't happen back then. Cool, kick-ass cult movie directors who only hardcore film geeks cared about didn't actually get to direct big-budget movies based on hardcore geek properties. That was always the trade-off. Yeah, Raimi's New Zealand doppelganger Peter Jackson had just begun to pull off The Lord of the Rings, but that was a little bit different. One of the undisputed most influential works of modern literature, and a director who'd at least had an Academy Award nod to his name recently. But the director of Evil Dead, Darkman, A Simple Plan, Army of Darkness, that one your dad really liked, the Maverick Coen brothers ally and self-made film geek god who introduced Bruce Campbell, Boomsticks, and Xena into our lives? Directing the Spider-Man movie? You didn't even dare to dream about stuff like that. It just didn't happen. And while the bulk of that early elation was about Raimi being a great director finally getting a shot at the really big leagues, yeah, it was also about a sense of relief. Regardless of whether or not he was a Spidey fan specifically, Sam Raimi was emphatically one of us, just like Peter Parker was supposed to be. And if the director's filmography didn't put us at ease, the first shots of the most unfathomably perfect live-action rendering of a comic book character since Christopher Reeve soon would. We could unclench. We could relax. The good guys were in charge for a change. But yes, in the finished product, what was most important is that Sam Raimi is a great filmmaker. At that point in time, one of the most singularly skilled people ever to helm a comic book adaptation. Despite having been the flashpoint from which a staggering amount of late 20th century pop art had sprung, no one had ever really attempted to execute a live-action rendering of the Marvel Universe from Stan Lee and his co-conspirators' implausibly fertile early days. Even the X-Men movies were primarily ultra-loose adaptations of characters and stories from, or mostly popularized in, the 80s and 90s, meaning that in Spider-Man, Raimi and his crew had to make the audiences believe in web-slinging and goblin gliders, just like the previous best superhero movie ever had to make us believe a man could fly. and they did it. By God, they did it. The original Spider-Man is that rare movie that does aesthetically what only the very best adaptations of classic stories can pull off. It's at once unmistakably a Silver Age Spider-Man movie, and also unmistakably a Sam Raimi movie, but also 100% its own unique creation. There had never been a movie, superheroes or otherwise, that looked and felt exactly like this one. An unprecedented fusion of the colorful early 60s adventurous optimism that's inseparable from the character's roots, with a recognizable modernity, a camera that's as soaring and daring as its hero, yet artful and deliberate as the carefully composed sequential panels from which he leapt, relatable young adult drama, and outlandish monster movie mad science existing side by side in symbiotic harmony. I cited Raimi and Spidey's parallels to Peter Jackson and The Fellowship earlier, and I remain convinced more than ever that it was the 1-2 punch combo of Spider-Man and Lord of the Rings, coupled perhaps with the vaunted return of the previous era's defining blockbuster showing up as an inert letdown, in which the 21st century blockbuster was truly born. And then everyone came back and did it all over again, but better for the sequel. I mean, good lord, what can even be said about Spider-Man 2 that showing won't accomplish? Hell, there's better action and more emotion in one elevated train fight in Spider-Man 2 than in most entire movies. And the cast! For all the credit Sam Raimi gets as a visual mastermind, his great unsung skill is in pulling legendary performances out of interesting actors. I mean, let's get real here. Camera tricks are great, but would Evil Dead have been anything if Raimi hadn't looked at his buddy Bruce Campbell and seen a guy who could embody an entirely new breed of genre-crossing post-meta action horror protagonist? And in the Spider-Man movies, he does it again. Just look back at this lineup. Tobey Maguire is a note-perfect, awkward, affected, puny Parker. Yeah, he cries, he has emotions, he makes strange faces, he's gangly and weird and somewhat off-putting. He's supposed to be. He's playing Spider-Man. And we also get Kirsten Dunst as the ultimate girl next door, James Franco being unironically compelling for the first and last time in his career, the perfect wise and loving Uncle Ben, the perfect saintly Aunt May, a Dr. Octopus who's actually more interesting than he was in the comics, and Willem Dafoe given one of the strangest and most memorable turns in one of the strangest filmographies in acting history. And speaking of history, let's face it, there has never been, nor will there ever likely again be, a more frighteningly exact translation of any comic book character from page to screen as J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson.
Parker, hello. You're fired. Spider-Man, hero or menace? Exclusive Daily Bugle photo.
New villain in town. Doc Ock.
He was protecting that armor.
I'll tell you what, Atticus. You take the pictures, I'll make up the headlines, okay?
He's a menace to the entire city. I want that wall-crawling arachnid prosecuted.
Whichever one's cheaper.
I want him strung up by his web.
Tomorrow morning, Spider-Man, page 1 with a decent picture this time. Move Conway to page 7.
There's a problem with page 7.
I make it page 8 and give him 10% off. I make it 5%.
That can't be done.
Get out of here.
And I'll make him infamous. The power of the press triumphs. Caviar.
Still not now.
Tell her not to open the caviar.
Some food got poisoned?
I'm a little nauseous, yeah.
Fella, we'll just put a rug there. Get your pretty little portfolio off my desk before I go into a diabetic coma. Call the patent office, copyright the name Green Goblin. I want a corner every time somebody says it. If we can get a picture of Julia Roberts in a thong, we can certainly get a picture of this weirdo. Meat. I'll send you a nice box of Christmas meat. Best I can do. Get out of here.
You don't trust anybody, that's your problem.
I trust my barber.
In spite of all this gushing, though, the basic question of whether or not Spider-Man 1 and 2 are good is pretty damn simple and easy. The first one is good because it tells an interesting story in a visually pleasing and narratively compelling way with richly detailed characters, played by well-cast actors turning in great performances, and Part 2 does all that again, but builds on the solid foundation with new depths for said characters and an expanding scope for the story, with both entries mining the very best parts of the source material's rich history while adding fresh ideas and new creative twists to their own. And that makes it sound as though making a great superhero movie, or great any type of movie really, should be easy. And yet, as we keep discovering again and 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 again, this is very much not the case. So discerning why these movies really work as well as they did means we have to dig for details. We must begin with the characters, because in truth that's why we're here. The sly secret to the superhero movie phenomenon is that despite the easy stereotyping of the genre as empty spectacle reliant on flashy costumes and action movie gimmicks, the main reason these stories acquire and maintain fans is because it's a medium built on characters. If that weren't the case, trust me, no one in Hollywood would pay good money for the rights to them. If all there was to Superman was his powers, if all there was to Batman was the costume or the utility belt, if all there was to Wolverine was the claws, if Daredevil was only a blindness gimmick, if the Hulk was just a smashy guy, if Wonder Woman was only a terrific pair of bracelets, the studio would save money and just make movies about a different super guy, or caped guy, or clawed guy, or blind guy, or smashy guy, or Amazon. And they don't, because while powers and costumes and gimmicks are nice, Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne, Logan, Matt Murdock, Bruce Banner, Diana, and yes, Peter Parker are great characters, and that's what's always kept people coming back to them.
Go, Spidey, go!
Part of what made Spider-Man so hard to crack as an adaptation in the past is that Peter Parker is actually a very difficult character to work with, mainly because he's kind of pathetic. He's weak, he's timid, the few areas where he does excel, i.e. intelligence, have less than zero commodity in his teenage social circles, his life isn't exciting, his future prospects even less so, and the one thing he does have going for him in the form of really great parental figures is the very thing a boy his age is hardwired to take for granted. And not only does his life suck, he's kinda whiny about it. And once he becomes Spider-Man, instead of powers solving all his problems, they all get worse. Remember, the very first Spider-Man comic story ends with Uncle Ben's murder and Peter discovering that he inadvertently caused it by being a selfish dick. This isn't a flashback or a rock-bottom moment before the rise, it's the literal point and moral to what was at the time the complete story of Spider-Man. Hey kids, think becoming a superhero will solve all your problems? Well, guess again. Spider-Man is eventually a great hero, but he never stops being his own worst enemy, with his second worst enemy being that he's exactly good enough of a person to be crushed by the guilt of failing to be a better person. And Tobey Maguire pulls this off perfectly. His Peter Parker is not simply an authentic nerd, but also a believable, authentically pathetic loser, helped largely by Maguire putting his thoroughly unique facial acting through serious paces from scene to scene. This isn't just putting some dumpy glasses on a glamorous actor and insisting that he's a geek. Maguire's Parker strikes the perfect balance between being sad, awkward, and vulnerable, so that we feel bad for him, but also weird and off-putting enough that we understand why people don't really want to get to know him. Remember these scenes?
I cried like a baby when you played Cinderella.
Peter, that was first grade.
Well, even so.
So, you just came by?
I was in the neighborhood. I needed to see a friendly face. I took 2 buses and a cab to get in the neighborhood.
Yeah, on the one hand, those are exactly the kind of sincere, earnest, right-for-the-gut, super attentive observations and romantic gestures a guy like this makes with complete and utter sincerity, and they're also the textbook behavior of a creepy-ass stalker, and Maguire's performance stands expertly on the razor-thin line between the two, just like how he nails Spider-Man never being exactly cool, even when he's trying his hardest to be. Maguire's Spidey is in the permanent pantheon of all-time great superhero turns, and it'll stay there because of a perfect synergy of an actor and director who both completely and tonally got it. Consider also Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
Deliver us! Finish it! Finish it!
Yes, I know, we'll talk about the costume later, but for now, suffice it to say that if the film airs here, it does so on the side of translating another deceptively difficult character to screen.
Hello, my dear.
Everyone knew from the get-go that Dafoe would nail the Goblin part of the role since, hey, it's Willem Dafoe. But what made the performance so memorable, they brought him back from the dead for both sequels, is how damn good he is at the full picture. Movies about people, super or not, adopting secret identities almost always fall back on the lazy trope of the mask ironically revealing the real man underneath. But that's not the case for Peter Parker, nor is it the case for Osborn. He's a genuinely good guy, if more than a little compromised by his personal drive, but everything he does seems to be for the right reasons. He does care about Harry, he does genuinely like Peter, and he's protective of the company he built because he's proud of that accomplishment. So when the Green Goblin persona emerges, it's not simply his dark side or id, it's a much more complicated and tragic pathology. The Green Goblin is all of Norman's qualities, good and bad, cranked up to 11. Murderous, jealous, cruel, and vindictive, but mainly in service of what the good persona actually desires. That's a lot more complicated than a guy who was always a monster finally getting to let his freak flag fly, which is what we usually get with supervillains. I mean, remember this?
We killed them.
We?
Remember your little accident in the laboratory?
Performance enhancers.
Bingo. Me, your greatest creation.
And remember how psyched you were when he showed up again in Spider-Man 2?
Avenge me! No!
Yeah, that's not just a famous face mugging for the camera in comic book makeup, that's an actor working his ass off and leaving everything up there on screen. And this spin on a Marvel supervillain worked so well, they used it again for the next guy.
Rebuild. No. Peter was right. I miscalculated. I couldn't have miscalculated. It was working, wasn't it? Yes.
Here's the problem with Dr. Octopus as the heavy of a Spider-Man movie. He's not interesting. He has a cool look, a fun name, and it's amusing that he's both a mad scientist and a mad scientist's rampaging robot monster, but like most of Spider-Man's classic-era foes, he's a villain defined by myopia, an already nasty bad guy who acquires superhuman abilities but still can't think beyond personal vendettas and short-term criminal profit. Hey, I just became basically a god. I guess I'll rob a bank. Good setup for a recurring villain in a monthly comic book, but for a movie, the character side was always going to need reinvention. And what a fascinating character Spider-Man 2's version of Doc Ock is.
I will not die a monster.
He's brilliant, but also worldly and well-rounded. He knows his way around super science, but also clearly knows his way around art and culture and literature. He's kinda on the chubby side, but it's working for him because Alfred Molina is owning that whole pan-Euro Mediterranean sexy fat guy thing. He's in a clearly adoring marriage.
Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future. I still don't understand what he was talking about.
Oh, come on.
I'm
Yes,
serious. T.S. Eliot is more complicated than advanced science. But if you want to get a woman to fall in love with you, feed her poetry.
He's basically the coolest guy on Earth and a living, breathing rebuke to the idea that a guy like Peter Parker has to be some kind of self-pitying sad sack as penance for his nerdy affectations and superior intellect. Or how did Otto Octavius himself put it?
Peter Parker.
Brilliant but lazy.
That's a devious approach, because when circumstances do inevitably conspire to reduce him to a single-minded, one-dimensional supervillain, via the genuinely fascinating sci-fi implication that his near death has put the inhuman single-mindedness of the tentacle rig in charge of his faculties rather than the other way around, it's the best of both worlds. We get the evil, unstoppable, bad-as-I-want-to-be Doc Ock of the comics, and all the really cool, subtle animation and puppetry that plays with the tentacles like sentient emoting creatures in their own right, but infused with the genuine tragic pathos of knowing how much more he was before, and how much of that loss we can feel. Oh, and please notice how both main villains are decent but compromised men whose dark sides both turn out to be unsettlingly close to their light sides just with the moral compass switched off. Perfect foils for Spider-Man, a hero who is entirely defined by straining under the weight of his own moral obligations. Like the man said,
With great power comes great responsibility.
Speaking of which, yeah, this series needed to find the ideal Uncle Ben Parker, and Cliff Robertson turned out to fit that bill and then some. This wasn't just about finding any likable older actor who could sound good saying the signature line. You're literally looking for someone to embody the soul of an entire film franchise. It's not just with great power needing to be spoken, it's Uncle Ben needing to become the surrogate father figure to an entire generation of moviegoers and superhero fans for this character and indeed the franchise. May, also a surprisingly complex role that, especially considering Hollywood isn't known for affording those to actresses of advancing age, even living legends of the international stage. There's no getting around the fact that Aunt May is a character, i.e. the frail, imperiled mother figure who exists as the living embodiment of the moral obligations that both enrich and stifle Peter Parker's actualization, is kind of a relic of the era in which the comics first appeared, but the film and Harris' performance therein invest her with real depth. We may only get hints of it in part 1.
You're not Superman, you know.
But that serves to tee up this perfect wrenching moment from part 2.
I've tried to tell you so many times.
Jeez, you know how long it took him to get to that part in the comics? A long time. And hey, James Franco was in these movies, right before he embraced his true calling as America's eternal art school student. At this point, I feel like you're either on board for this guy or you're not, but he was really good in these. Harry Osborn is a difficult character because we have to like him, but also not. His relationship to all the other characters has to be kind of lightly toxic and weird, but also make a certain amount of sense, and just a little bit off-kilter performance does the job selling it.
What do you mean he's incredible? No, alright. Wait, stay there. I'm gonna come over. No, I'm gonna come over. We'll go and have breakfast, and I want to buy you something. Because I want to. It'll make you feel better.
We understand, without the movie having to put a bow on it, that he's mainly friends with Peter because they both didn't have any other friends, and otherwise they have basically nothing in common. We can deduce that his later relationship with Mary Jane is more about the relief his position provides from how difficult her life is otherwise. He wants to be the man, but he knows he's not. He resents his father, but also doesn't. And then in part 2, when he enthusiastically tries to become his father, all conflicting emotion takes him to a pretty dark place. I don't care what you think of Franco's shtick otherwise, this is a hell of a performance across 2 films.
Don't act like you're my friend. You stole MJ from me. You stole my father's love. And you let him die because he didn't turn in the freak. Isn't that right?
Huh? And then there's Mary Jane Watson. Now, usually we talk about the stuff that doesn't work later, so spoiler, she's going to come up again in more detail later. But yes, for now, we'll just admit that Kirsten Dunst is the weak link in these movies. Mostly the first one. She gets a lot better in part 2, where they actually let the character push back a bit against all the defining and projection that gets dumped on her by the male characters, but yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. If nothing else, Dunst does what she can with a role that's maybe a little too well cast. After all, she does manage to perfectly embody the relatively shallow qualities that drive the girl-next-door fixations of dweeby high schoolers, like Peter Parker. Hell, even the minor characters in these movies are colorful and memorable.
Close up his hands, ropes come out, and he climbs up the ropes like a spider web.
And don't try to sneak past me. I have ears like a cat and eyes like a rodent.
What's your name, kid?
The human spider.
The human spider, that's it? That's the best you got?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
Otto's done his homework. Come to the demonstration tomorrow and you'll see for yourself.
The next person who talks will fail this course. I kid you not.
My class is over. See me standing here?
I'm sorry.
Anybody here take shop class?
You're out, Norman.
Some kind of freaky Lou or something. Wackadoo.
He stinks, and I don't like it.
I heard Spider-Man was there. Where were you?
Guy with 8 hands. Sounds hot.
No one will be seated after the doors are closed. It helps maintain the illusion.
And once again, even if these movies weren't all that good, we'd probably still have fond memories of just how good J.K. Simmons was. But you know, what's easy to forget is it's not just a great comic relief turn, and I don't necessarily think the character would be this beloved if there wasn't more to him. Specifically this.
Jameson, you slime! Who's the photographer who takes the pictures of Spider-Man? I don't know who he is. His stuff comes in the mail. You're lying! I swear.
That right there is how good screenwriting and a great actor can massively expand a character's dimensionality with a single moment and a handful of words. Look what's going on. As far as we'd seen by that point, Jameson is just a selfish, narcissistic prick. But now, suddenly, with zero hesitation, he's about to die to save Peter Parker's life by lying to the Green Goblin. Why? He doesn't know this kid that well. He hasn't even been outwardly nice to him even a little that we've seen. He only just found out the Goblin even exists. But now we see his first reaction, given the option, is to give up his own life to save what is to him apparently just some kid photographer.
He's the one who can bring me to it. I don't know who he is. You are useless.
Set him down, tough guy.
We never exactly find out why he does this either. Does he have some unspoken affection for Peter, maybe seeing a young would-be photojournalist as a mirror of himself? Is he just secretly the kind of boss who'd take a bullet for any of his employees? Has the tough guy bluster not been an act this whole time? Is this the real JJ? Like, was he a champion of the people, decent crusading newsman back in the day? We don't really need to know. Every possible answer just makes him more interesting. Which is why it fits when he drops the act again, if only for a moment, in part 2.
Spider-Man was a hero. I just couldn't see it. He was a thief!
love that guy. So yeah, great characters, which speaks volume about the actors and the scripts, but more goes into it even still, and all of it would be for naught without the vision and above all else steady guiding hand of the director. And yes, that means we'll have to take an even closer look at the choices and contributions of Mr. Sam Raimi. I told you this was going to be a long one, folks. Okay, pop quiz. What is the most iconic scene from the entire original Spider-Man trilogy? Not the best scene or the most exciting scene or whatever. I'm asking you what was and ever shall be Spider-Man's version of this.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Or this.
I'm the king of the world!
Or this.
Part of your
Or this.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
Or this. Or this.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Or this.
I am your father.
Or this.
God, I love being a turtle!
Get it now? I'm asking what is the scene that was so perfect, so evocative, so immediately declarative of this is what the movie is, this is what we're selling, that it became the moment of the entire then-prospective franchise before the film had even come out. The answer, even if you've never actually seen either of these movies, should be obvious. Upside-down kiss. Yes, this to me is the thesis of the entire series and the Rosetta Stone of why these first two films worked so goddamn well and hit so goddamn big when they did. Everything from the setup to the execution, to the understanding of the comics material, to the understanding of the cinematic form, to the elevation of both, the casting, the writing, the staging, the specific directorial decisions, it's all right here, in about 2 minutes of total screen time. Called Spider-Man, you're getting a pretty big audience right off the bat. This wasn't the first wave of Avengers lead-ups where the real question was whether or not anyone was going to show up for like 4 previous movies about all these other guys who were friends with the one guy they kind of recognize. Everyone had heard of Spider-Man. Super famous, well-known character right up there in pop culture ubiquity with Batman and Superman. And when you get to stuff like the mythos and the visuals and the costume this right, and you blow up enough stuff to get the broader every action movie blockbuster crowd to show up, you're almost guaranteed a pretty sizable hit. But if you're looking to do what Spider-Man did in terms of connecting with audiences on a profound level, a level where you become the first movie to make $100 million in one weekend and set a record for highest opening day gross ever that it stands until it's broken 2 years later by your own sequel, you have to step up your game. And what's going on here is a microcosm of how they did it. It comes in at just the right time, it speaks to the characters, it's really on the nose but in the correct genre-appropriate fashion, it's cute and sweet and a little awkward in the way young romance is supposed to be, it's sexy without being sleazy, but it is a little bit kinky, what with the inverted hanging and the mask and the super clingy wet dress and the fact that it takes place immediately after Spidey is just beaten like 4 guys unconscious. And look, not to put too fine a point on it because this is a family show, but, well, rain, splashing, water running down stuff, basically liquid in motion of any kind is a pretty big-time subliminal signifier for arousal. But interestingly, unlike romantic interludes in most action movies, it's not a signifier for male arousal. It's the kind of fantastically staged scene you want in a big crowd-pleasing movie. Identifiable scenario, familiar sensation, but an utterly fresh take that can only exist because of the specific component parts of this movie, i.e. the New York alley setting, the spider mask, his particular power set, etc. More incredible still, it's almost entirely the creation of the film. This wasn't some huge iconic moment like letting the thief go, or Osborn impaled by his own glider, or having to save a girl on the bridge, or Doc Ock getting a face full of webbing, or Spidey holding up half a building, or Spider-Man No More, where you've got direct legendary scenes from the comic to draw from. This was a new gag they came up with specifically for the movie, and now it's one of the most iconic images in the entire Spider-Man canon. And hell, it's not even the best sequence in this series. This is. although that sequence works for pretty much exactly the same reasons as the kiss. And that, folks, is why you hire a director like Sam Raimi. Yes, film geeks immediately went nuts when the cult horror icon got the job, and yes, a lot of it was because we loved Evil Dead and Darkman and Hercules and Xena, and Bruce Campbell was probably going to show up.
The Amazing Spider-Man!
And it was exciting to have a filmmaker who openly and proudly came from the same dorky, comic-reading, con-going, fanboyish place we did directing a Spider-Man movie, but it was also because he's a really great filmmaker whose unique cinematic voice and aesthetic sensibility would have been perfectly matched to the material even if he wasn't a particularly big fan of it, which it turned out he was. But still, the key to Raimi's genius has always been a seamless fusion between seemingly disparate influences and approaches. In the Evil Dead movies, he invented an entirely new visual language for both horror and action, but did so in service of a film made up of classical horror motifs, retro spookhouse kitsch, and an old-fashioned EC Comics approach to gore. Sure, mashing comedy into the action horror chimera was a newfangled approach at the time, but his comedy influences were strictly old school. Looney Tunes, Three Stooges, take your pick. He's at once a mischievous prankster who seemingly lives to break the rules of genre and good taste, yet his formal sensibilities cast him as a cinematic classicist of a profoundly traditional stripe. Pretty much exactly the Voltron of contradictions you expect from someone who wears a suit and tie while directing splatter movies. That kind of contradictory fusion is exactly the kind of vision that was needed to shove the superhero movie forward in a bold new direction, by looking back into the creative DNA of the genre. Over the course of these two films, Raimi and his collaborators consistently strike the delicate balance between cartoonish absurdity and tangible realism, finding the sweet spot where people with ridiculous powers and colorful costumes are an organic component to an authentic encapsulation of New York City at the turn of the millennium, blurring the line to the point where a character like this, technology like this, and a scene like this
Some talking to the sun, and I said I didn't like the way he got things done, sleeping on the job.
all feel like they belong in the same space. Not just in the way he stages action and arranges scenes, no, but in the way he uses all the other tools made available to him. For example, yes, the late Macho Man Randy Savage is pretty much just doing the same business he'd been cutting promos on for most of his career as Bonesaw McGraw, but Raimi and cinematographer Don Burgess make him look even more awesome than the WWE, WCW, or any other promotion ever did.
Are you ready for more? Bonesaw is ready!
Or the way he understood that nobody cares that the way Spidey's mask connects to the rest of his costume doesn't make any damn sense. Peter Parker is dorky, then by God, Raimi is gonna let him be dorky. Or the way he lets the running out of the wedding ending of part 2 look, feel, and play out like the soft-focused soap opera melodrama that it should, rather than trying to find some way to make it more action blockbustery. This is a love story, and he's confident enough to direct it like one. Or the mileage he gets out of Danny Elfman's severely underappreciated score, widely dismissed at the time for being too similar to his other work in the genre, but actually quite different. Again. Listen to the subtle choir effect in the strings with the French horn, and I think it sounds like there's some bassoon in there too. I'm not really an orchestral music expert, sorry. This isn't entirely or even overwhelmingly a march or a dirge like so many other comic and superhero movie scores went for, largely an imitation of Elfman's still unequaled Batman score. This sounds more like mass music, which is perhaps appropriate given how much the mythos of New York City, informed as it is so profoundly by blue-collar Irish and Italian Catholic psyches, is bound up in the foundations of the Marvel Comics universe that birthed Spider-Man. Hell, this score is so damn evocative that even though Elfman and Raimi apparently had some kind of huge falling out during the production of Spider-Man 2, leading to the production having to simply reuse work he'd already done, it still works! So, hell of a cast, hell of a crew, enough praise to go around that you might think these are two perfect movies. But, of course, they are not. Yes, I know we usually do On the Other Hand right before the ending, but the impact segment on this one is going to be a little bit on the heavy side for reasons I'm sure some of you already figured out and were wondering why I haven't brought up yet, so yeah, gotta do that more towards the end. Anyway, time to talk about the stuff that doesn't work. Okay, right off the bat, I don't really personally think the organic web shooters were this huge problem. Yeah, I was ticked off when I first heard about it like every other fanboy, but truth be told, once I saw the movie, I really didn't miss them. Nor did I miss the extra focus on Peter Parker's super scientist that goes along with them. An adaptation has to pick its battle, and while I agree that Peter being specifically a science nerd is important, and I'm glad it gets more airtime in the second one regarding his relationship to Otto Octavius, because they don't really quite highlight well enough in the first one that this is the source point of Norman feeling like they have more in common than he does with his own son, and that's an important subplot, the web shooters have always mainly been used as an excuse to have Peter run out of ammo to kick up the tension or shake up the scenario once every few battles, and since movies don't have to come out on a monthly schedule, there's a lot less need for that. It's a flaw, I guess, but it's really more of a fanboy complaint than an actual problem with the movies.
Go, Web! Fly! Up, up, and away, Web! Shazam! Go! Go! Go, Web, go!
And I bring it up first as a matter of getting this out of the way. Apart from fanboy complaints and technical stuff, there's just not that much wrong with these two movies. There just isn't. The thing of it is, the On the Other Hand segment is generally here for talking about serious flaws in otherwise good or beloved film, stuff that's problematic or uncomfortably dated or a serious structural issue. Technical nitpicking about dodgy CGI or mistakes like some kind of IMDb busybody, I've got no interest in doing. I've been back over both of these movies a couple of times for this episode, and there's just not that much seriously wrong with either of them. They're just really, really solid movies. But no, not perfect. The Green Goblin armor doesn't really work. I think the overall design is interesting enough, but yeah, it doesn't really get there, even though Dafoe's performance, the choreography, and the direction pick up the slack and get it really close. The helmet bobbing around with the immobile facial expression looks clearly strange. The rest of it is supposed to be this intimidating suit of armor, and it's clearly plastic because no one really ever figured out how to make powered armor work on screen until the CGI enhanced stuff for Iron Man. Yeah, basically, it's a good thing they stuck a really good actor in here. Oh, and I guess it helps that the director is an expert at making goofy stuff scary. And building a badass fight scene for any two characters.
I offered you friendship, and you spat in my face.
I never quite understood the criticism that he looks like a Power Ranger, though. I mean, first off, he really doesn't. Secondly, so what? I mean, it's a superhero movie. That it shares vague aesthetic similarities with a superhero TV show shouldn't somehow be shocking, especially a superhero TV show so ubiquitous that it had been on the air for a decade when the first Spider-Man movie came out, with its Japanese inspiration series having been running from roughly 1975 until now. Does he look a little silly? Yeah, but, you know, the rest of the movie is centered on the kid from Pleasantville wearing a red and blue body stocking, so what's the silly curve here exactly?
Impressive!
You have to sympathize with the filmmakers here, though, stuck in a no-win situation. The Green Goblin is the Spider-Man villain. You have to use him. Not doing that would be like not using the Red Skull, or Joker, or Lex Luthor, or Loki. But the Green Goblin of the comics simply does not translate to live action directly. The whole shtick of the character is that it's just a crazy guy letting his split personality manifest through a tacky rubber Halloween mask. Keyword mask. Not a physical transformation, a costume he can take on or off as a dark mirror to the way Peter also slips in and out of a double life. A nut in a Halloween costume. Hence the Goblin Glider originating as a rocket-powered witch's broom, the pumpkin bombs, the whole thing. Problem is, in a comic book, you can make a rubber Halloween mask have facial expressions. In a movie, that wasn't gonna fly. So no matter what, there was gonna have to be a compromise, and while the prosthetic makeup tests they did for a more flesh and blood look are interesting, I think I would have ultimately gone with the armored look in order to keep the mask gimmick intact. If for no other reason than to keep the scenes where Osborn is arguing with the damn thing.
We can destroy him.
I can't.
Betrayal must not be countenanced. Parker must be educated.
But how?
The cunning warrior attacks neither body nor mind.
Tell me how!
The heart, Osborn. First, we attack his heart.
And it provides the perfect iconic central prop for Harry's big revelation scene in Part 2. Speaking of Spider-Man 2, the business in the second act where Peter's powers start to fizzle out because of his waning commitments and fluctuating self-confidence doesn't really work at all. It does the job in the plot as far as providing a tangible visual demonstration that something is wrong, but it feels kind of unnecessary, and the fact that it comes and goes without any real explanation and no indication in either film that the powers were ever tied to his self-esteem is a weird note. Not a deal-breaker by any means, but weird, and again, not necessary. Maguire is a good actor. He could have sold "I'm seriously off my game" without a physiological rationale within the script.
Why is this happening to me?
Oh, and back to the Goblin again. Norman's evil half suddenly dropping notes of social Darwinism and/or makers versus takers, Randian objectivism into his villain speech repertoire. Interesting, but it doesn't really seem to come from or go anywhere character-wise. It's a weird set of beats. Are they just taking a shot at and/or tipping the hat towards co-creator Steve Ditko? No idea.
But the one thing they love more than a hero is to see a hero fail, fall, die trying. Here's the real truth. There are 8 million people in this city, and those teeming masses exist for the sole purpose of lifting the few exceptional people onto their shoulders. You, me, we're exceptional.
But if we're going to talk a serious problem across both of these movies, we have to talk Mary Jane. Mary Jane just doesn't work. To put things bluntly, Mary Jane really isn't much of a character in these movies. She's alternately a plot device, a motivator, or an object, and given that she's the most prominent female character in a pair of movies that only really have 2 meaningful female characters, that's just not cool, and it hurts both films. Not necessarily in some kind of quota-filling, where are the women gender parody sense, but in the sense of the main emotional through-line of this series is a love story between these 2 characters, and one of them isn't really a character. It doesn't ruin either film by any means, because Dunst is a solid actress even with this material, and Mary Jane's place in the structure of both stories makes sense and fits together logically. It's just that your lead actress and co-lead of the movie really should be more than just structure. And I get that this sounds contradictory. How can a character be functional and yet not work? It's complicated. So think about the first movie. In Spider-Man 1, Mary Jane is the prize that Peter's eyes are on. The film is structured as a classical boy becomes a man narrative, and it leans really hard on the angle of the spider powers as a metaphor for puberty.
Change? Yeah. Big change.
And Mary Jane is literally the girl who makes Peter shoot his first involuntary, webbing. I honestly forgot how not at all subtle they were about the webbing as ejaculate stuff. But yeah, there it is. He's a boy, Mary Jane has awakened his first stirrings of Spider-Manhood, and the journey he takes is entirely motivated by a drive to win her attention. Remember, the whole reason he goes to the fateful wrestling match, which gets Uncle Ben killed, which drives him to become Spider-Man, is because he wanted money to buy a car to impress her. And even as he grows gradually into a more selfless hero, she's always there, a walking, talking motivation, until...
I love you so much, Peter.
We reach our conclusion, and Peter Parker, finally presented fair and square with one thing he has always wanted more than anything else in the world, says no, because he has to. Perfect performance, perfect moment, perfect ending, tragic but noble, exactly how a great Spider-Man story pretty much has to end. The boy becomes a man by finally accepting the most difficult lesson he'll ever learn. Doing the right thing and getting what you deserve, what you want, or even just simply being happy aren't always going to be the same thing. More substantively, Peter has actually matured in terms of how he views Mary Jane. He no longer regards her solely as an idealized, out-of-reach, precious object at the end of his personal rainbow, but as a human being whose life and safety are more important than how happy being with her can make him. That arc of personal growth and the way it plays across the sweep of the film and into the second one is reason number 1 with a bullet why that movie works.
This is my gift. My curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
So, how does Mary Jane feel about this? What's her arc? What does she want? What are her feelings, thoughts, opinions on the circumstances fate has put her through? What's the basic overriding thrust of her character as the second most important figure in the story? Exactly. Ironically, the movies don't ever learn the lesson Peter did. They never let Mary Jane become her own person outside their needs for her. Now, this gets a lot better in Part 2, because Part 2 is all about Peter getting called out on his own go-it-alone martyrdom in his superhero career, but even then, she seems to be lacking a sense of interior life. Most prominently, there's not really much sense of what her apparently very serious relationship with John Jameson actually is, outside of something that's an obstacle to her winding up with the guy we're supposed to want her to be with. They really only have one big scene together, and it only exists to remind us that her mind is elsewhere to a certain degree.
Just put my head back.
Okay.
I'm back on the moon.
Yes, it's an inspired from a narrative standpoint that Part 2 ends on a direct reversal of Part 1's big finish, i.e. Mary Jane selflessly accepting the danger and difficulty of being with Peter out of love, but it's not an equal reversal. Peter arrived at his decision as the logical endpoint of a moral journey he had taken across an entire film, in adherence to a philosophical ideal, but Mary Jane gets here because she realizes she truly loves Peter because the knowledge that he's Spider-Man fills in all the stuff that wasn't lining up before. I mean, it works for narrative, but it's still only narrative, in that what's important is that Peter Parker finally gets his reward.
I love you. So here I am, standing in your doorway. I've always been standing in your doorway.
It's the Willy Wonka, you get what you want by proving you are willing to let it go ending, but instead of winning a candy factory, he's winning a person. Yeah, again, not saying Mary Jane's unrealized potential as a character is a mortal wound to either movie, just that it's the glaring serious imperfection in two films that are otherwise operating at the very top level of big-budget blockbuster craftsmanship. And it's not about she's not a strong enough female character, although that's an entirely fair criticism as this genre is kind of a sausage fest. It's about the emotional center of the story, which should be the core of the audience's connection to the movies, being only pretty good when it should have been even more soaring and powerful and dramatic than everything else. And yet, people did connect with these movies in a big, big way. Yes, any Spider-Man movie was going to be a hit, but this was bigger. This was massive, earth-shaking, culture-reshaping moment, and that comes from an audience connecting with films all the way down to the marrow. Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 did not simply give audiences what they wanted, they awoke in the worldwide movie-going culture of an awareness of a need said culture didn't even realize it had, and then filled it. What was it? Well, if you're asking me, I think Spider-Man, both the character and the movie, was a hero that arrived exactly at a moment in time when we most needed him. Which, yes, means it's now time to talk about the elephant in the room. Hi, I'm Bob, and I make the show. I wanted to come in here before we got to this part, and I'm working completely unscripted here, by the way, so if you see any strange edits, that would be why. So, here's the thing. I understand that to a lot of the world and my international viewers, some of my domestic viewers, I'm sure, that it is tiresome, can be tiresome, to continue to hear American critics, American writers, American culture commentators, whatever you think I qualify as, relating every single early 21st century work of popular culture of note back to 9/11. I get that. I understand. And I understand that there is possibly even some resentment there, since one of the reasons that 9/11 was such an impactful event to Americans is because we don't deal with things like that, tragedies like that, nearly as much as many other areas of the world do, that in some respects we are sheltered. So I understand the tendency to eye roll or shake one's head or feel deflated when something like this comes up in relation to another early 21st century blockbuster movie. Oh, here we go again with the 9/11 discussion and how did this feel in the aftermath. I do think that some of that kind of analysis is overblown. Not everything that happened in popular culture in the early 21st century is or was necessarily some kind of interesting, notable reaction to September 11th. But some things were, and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, the first one especially, and also the second one, it was only 3 years later after all, very much are. And I tried to, write this analysis with only a cursory mention of it, an aside, and it just didn't feel right, it didn't feel honest, it didn't feel like I was doing justice to the films or offering you a proper, full context analysis like Really That Good is supposed to stand for. You wouldn't talk about the original Godzilla in full and expect to give it a complete, thorough analysis without talking about Hiroshima and what it meant as a direct reaction to that. I don't think you can really fully appreciate what Star Wars meant in 1977 without understanding what was going on with American youth culture in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. In those two cases, it's the reason those two films existed. This is part of why this episode took so long to put together, because deciding that this aspect of these films was something that needed to be talked about meant I had to significantly step up my game. I hope that I have proven worthy of the material here. All I can ask is that if you are indeed someone who feels that you have just heard everything you've ever needed to hear about the impact of 9/11 on popular culture, is that you give this part of the episode a chance. And hopefully, if I have risen to the challenge, by the time you have listened to it, you'll understand where I'm coming from and why I felt that this was absolutely a necessary part of this episode. I could be wrong, but I don't think that I am, and I wrestled with this. So, here goes. I really hope that you take something positive away from this. Thank you. There are a few simple philosophical pretexts underpinning Really That Good as a series. Among them, no work of art can be properly discussed without taking into account the culture into which it was born and the world into which it was received. Also, if a movie is beloved, not just popular or well-reviewed or praised, but beloved, there's probably something potent, vital, and worthwhile there beyond just momentary entertainment or fond memories. The Marvel Comics universe and New York City are inextricably bound together. Setting the action in the real city where the writers and artists were largely living was part of what distinguished the world of the brand and lent a unique flavor to the various characters, and while plenty of them do work just fine transplanted to other cities or a global stature, others just kind of belong there, and Spider-Man is one of them. And not just because the web-swinging thing needs a city packed with tightly grouped towering skyscrapers to make any kind of sense. You can change pretty much anything else about Peter Parker, but he's a kid from Queens. It's just who he is. When the first Spider-Man movie went into production, hell, by the time it had been most of the way shot, this wasn't an issue. We'd been setting movies of all stripes in New York for decades, and then everything changed. Yes, the most visible example of this was the film's teaser trailer depicting a helicopter getting stuck in a giant web stretched between the Twin Towers, a trailer that had been running non-stop since early July, vanished after 9/11, never to be officially seen again. And there was the uncomfortable question of whether or not to digitally erase the towers themselves from location footage that the film had already shot. But it was more than that. Raimi's Spider-Man was, above all else, setting out to be a bright, sunny, optimistic movie, in spite or because of depicting the adventures of one of comics' all-time sad sack superheroes. This was deliberately the movie that broke the decade-long stranglehold of brooding gothic grittiness on the genre, and a key component of this is that New York is a city built on optimism, forward-thinking, industrial societal progress, futurism. That's what it's always been about, even in, heck, especially in, the famously edgy decades where its Marvel Comics incarnation took their full shape. Remember, the myth of the Tower of Babel, with a moral specifically warning humanity not to build giant towers to reach heaven and or godhood, is the foundational know your place mortals parable of at least 3 major world religions. And here's New York City made of buildings like that. The whole town is one colossal declaration of, hey, I got your godhood right here, pal. And now it's got a gigantic, gaping wound in the middle of it. We've seen the all-time symbol of the promise of the American century covered in ash and debris and smoke and bodies. We know that a straight line now leads directly from that wound to the kind of wars some of us hoped we were never going to need to fight again. And now here's a movie about Spider-Man, one of the all-time 4-color mascots for a certain certain spirit of this great American city that we still weren't certain we'd ever get back. Hell, we had to wonder if it was even appropriate anymore to smile and laugh and thrill to the fantasy of a superhero swinging in to rescue people falling out of the sky, now that we've been reminded in the worst possible way that in real life that's not how it works, and where we've been reminded also in the worst way possible to refocus our praise to the real heroism of firefighters, cops, soldiers, and EMTs. But it wasn't just about the first feature film incarnation of Spider-Man having to justify his own continued existence in an entirely reshaped pop culture landscape a scant 8 months after 9/11. It had to grapple with an audience whose expectations for what would make us stand up and cheer had shifted dramatically. It was a moment in time when we desperately needed a hero, but the singular individual badass conquering the villain and completing the hero's journey just wasn't going to cut it anymore. At least not right then. The cultural zeitgeist was about a 21st century version of an old ideal reawakened. People from all walks of life united in mutual support and in defiance of unthinkable, overwhelming horror. But no movie had yet found the precise chemistry of escapism, acknowledgement, and catharsis a post-9/11 world was aching for, yet couldn't really put into words. And then this happened.
It's time to die!
Come on up here, tough guy. I got a little something for you.
Yeah, kick your freaking ass!
Leave Spider-Man alone. You gonna pick on a guy trying to save a bunch of kids?
Oh yeah, I got something for your ass! You mess with Spidey, you mess with New York!
You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
Cheesy? Yes. Appropriate? I think so. Necessary? Without question. I don't think I'll ever forget being in a theater on opening day and seeing the shockwave go through an audience. It's a culmination of an energy and feeling that had been flowing under the surface of the entire movie, breaking free and becoming explicit, and it was the exact right feeling at the exact right time. This wasn't just wanted, this was needed. Movies and comics and modern-day myth-making about heroes isn't just entertainment or even art, it's the heart of a culture. And Spider-Man arrived at a moment when that pop cultural heart had had a non-insignificant piece ripped out of it. But in this moment, through this movie, you could feel a tiny bit of what was missing start to grow back. Does that equal pandering? No. Resoundingly no. In another context, perhaps, but here's the issue. I have no idea whether they added this beat later or not, because it doesn't really matter. It's a perfect Spider-Man scene, the kind of scene that could have played out in any one of several hundred issues of the comics. Spidey is the hero of the people, a symbol to rally around, the flip side of the subplot of being persecuted by the Bugle. What I'm driving at is, yes, I think it's unquestionable that one of the main reasons these films hit like they did when they did, and have remained such a landmark even as the genre they helped elevate has only continued to grow and evolve, is because it was exactly the right movie at exactly the right moment, but it wasn't really trying to be. Spider-Man, that scene included, showed up in theaters and acted exactly like a Spider-Man movie should, and it turned out Spider-Man was the hero we needed.
God bless you, Spider-Man. Bless you.
Marianne, don't let him get away! Hold it! Hold it right there. You're under arrest. I'm taking you in.
Oh my God, there's somebody still up there!
I'm going. I'll be here when you get back.
Not coming back, Chief.
Go! Go!
Yes, maybe we were extra receptive to it because of what it now meant in the new light of then recent events, but the thing people connected with was organically built into both the material and Sam Raimi's unique take on it. That sense of catharsis, of a city, of a people, and of a hero representing both rising above profound tragedy is woven all throughout both of these films, and as if to prove that the visceral reaction audiences had to these themes was not just a knee-jerk Pavlovian response to what wound up being the first big New York set crowd pleaser of the post-9/11 era, in 2004, Spider-Man 2 arrived in a world where the post-attack drawn-out moment of unity in the US had begun to segue into war fatigue and political infighting, and yet that same spirit, first glimpsed in the original, bubbles up again to punctuate what I've already argued ends up being the high point of the entire series.
He's just a kid. No older than my son.
He's mine!
You want to get to him, you got to go through me.
And me.
Me too.
Damn. The books, paintings, songs, images, games, and yes, the movies that make up the high pantheons of popular culture and eventually just plain culture are established as such both by their innate qualities, but also by what they mean to the people who received them. The world needed Snow White in 1937. The world needed The Lord of the Rings in 1954. The world needed the Beatles in 64. We needed Easy Rider in 69. We needed Rocky in 76. We needed Star Wars in 77. We needed Super Mario Bros. In 84. We needed Pulp Fiction in 94. We needed The Matrix in 99. And in 2002, the world needed Spider-Man. And that need was met. Twice.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble, and finally allows us to die with pride, even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams.
Well, this was a long one, huh? Spider-Man 1 and 2 are, upon reflection, probably two films for whom my regard has risen the most so far in the production of this series. Obviously, I'd already known they were great films and loved them, otherwise I wouldn't have started in on it in the first place. But just how good and how well they've held up all these years later was a genuine thrill to rediscover when rewatching them for this episode.
Isn't it about time somebody saved your life?
Indeed, they are together two of the all-time great achievements of the superhero subgenre, but also so much more than that. They're great human stories, great love stories, great action epics, and great character dramas. The heroes are infused with an innately compelling goodness, the villains with fascinating psychological depth. They are at once loving, authentic, faithful translation of modern pop mythology, and the instantly recognizable singular artistic achievements of a true cinematic auteur.
I've been like a father to you. Be a son to me now.
I have a father. His name was Ben Parker.
They are two films that are as timeless and humble as the comic books they came from, but also priceless cultural documents preserving a fascinating moment, not just in movie history, but the history of a city and a people. Here are two films that laid the earliest solid foundations for a shift in the hierarchy of blockbuster genre film that has transformed global media in a truly profound way.
Doctor Strange.
That's pretty good. But it's taken.
And yet they remain fresh, vital, and enshrined at the very top of the tower they helped build, and they do so by telling grand, powerful stories. Stories of men and monsters, stories of conflict and chaos, stories of love, loss, hate, and forgiveness, stories of strange creatures and fantastical science, but also of families, friends, and neighbors. And despite their deceptively simple underpinnings and broad, exaggerated characters, here are two films that defy not only expectations, but genre, tonality, and easy categorization. In a cinematic era utterly dominated by comic book superheroes, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 and 2 remind us nearly 2 decades later why the world fell in love with this stuff to begin with. It's not just nostalgia. It's not just that they were among the first. Your memories are not lying to you. These are amazing, spectacular, sensational films from one of our great modern filmmakers working at the peak of his abilities. Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 are really that good.
Go get him, Tiger.